Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have an 8-game slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. I do have some core plays in here, Burleson, Drury, and Gorman here on DraftKings, and then Toscar, Hernandez, Tyler O'Neill, Chris Bryant on FanDuel. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. I also just wanted to showcase our Discord, so make sure to consider joining it if you want. There's some cool people in here, and we talk about baseball. We also have an MLB home run area. We have lineup discussion and some other stuff. And then you can post your wins and things like that around here. So definitely check that out. Also, I do have a Patreon, and what I do is I do a write-up for DraftKings Baseball, and you can kind of see what that looks like here today. This is the lineup thing today. I also put my FanDuel picks, and I do a little write-up for the pitchers on FanDuel, but then I just do the list for the batters. But you know, the information from the DraftKings kind of fits into the FanDuel anyway. So I just wanted to showcase that. You can join that for any amount. It doesn't matter. It starts at $5, I think. So yeah. So if you're interested in any of those things, feel free to join them. With that said, guys, let's go ahead and get into our picks today. We have a great slate here. There's pretty good value today. We do have some stackable teams as well. Let me tell you what those teams are. So St. Louis, the Angels, Colorado, and Texas are pretty much the top four stacks. Atlanta also has some low-end upside, as does Seattle and Arizona. So we do have a lot of good teams playing today. We do have some good pitching today as well. However, a lot of the good pitchers are against tougher opponents. But we're going to start with Max Scherzer for New York Mets. He is facing San Diego, and he started the season off really rough. Though he has had some decent strikeouts in the first game against Miami, he's given up, I believe, 8 earned runs so far this season, which is not ideal. But he only had a few sub-15 fantasy point games last year, and the last one came against San Diego. He also scored 21 fantasy points versus him last year, and he, he does have a good K rate, so that does give him some upside in this matchup. He's somewhat risky just because he's the highest priced player on the slate, and a lot of the other pitchers are a little bit cheaper, which helps us pay for better batters. But he's still viable on the slate as he's the best overall pitcher in general. But I'd like to see him have a really good game where he doesn't give up a bunch of earned runs this season before I really start rostering him. But he is it's a decent matchup, and there's not any of our top tier pitchers who are against weaker opponents. So he definitely has some value on the slate. Luis Castillo for Seattle, also somewhat interesting today. A little bit risky as well, but he has played very well to start the season in 2 good games here, both with 6 strikeouts, and he's got the second best K rate on the slate. And though he is against the Cubs, which is a little bit tough, but he does have a good opportunity here to have a good game. He also hasn't given up an earned run yet this season, only 3 hits, and so as long as he plays well, he's definitely worth taking a look at here, especially on a slate with all the pitchers going up against tough opponents. Then we're looking at Julio Urias, and he's probably my favorite pitcher right now on the slate, just because of his upside. He has good strikeout potential here. He is facing San Francisco, who also is a pretty good team, but he actually faced them 5 times last season, and he scored 23 fantasy points or more in all those games, including 3 earned runs combined, as well as 4 wins in those 5 games. He does get a ton of wins in these with the Dodgers, which also gives him some bonus points as well. And it's hard to dislike him on the slate with all the good pitchers having unappealing matchups. And then the last guy I'm going to mention here on DraftKings is Yu Darvish for San Diego against the Mets. Not the best option, but he does have a good K rate here. He's also had 3 games versus the Mets last year. His pitching is full of good. The pitching on the slate is full of good pitchers, but it's also those pitchers against good teams. So he is a valuable option on a slate. He's priced cheap enough that he's a good alternative to Castillo if you want to go that way, or to even Urias. But he is a little bit riskier because he's not quite as crisp as some of the other guys on the slate, but he does have good metrics for this matchup. Let's go ahead and get in the catchers. Excuse me, sorry about that, guys. We are going to start with Wilson Contreras for Seattle. He looks like he's in a really good option today. Seattle is projected to score a lot of runs against a pitcher and Marquise who has not done well last season. He had 2 games all of last year where he didn't give up earned runs. And in those two games, we're both on the road. This game's at Colorado. The wind is looking good for this game, and obviously the elevation gives a nice boost as well. So he's like a really good option on the slate at this position, and he's viable because he's not, too expensive. Now, Salvador Perez also has good metrics here, but he is kind of in a tougher matchup against Heaney. But he does have good metrics on this matchup, and he's viable play on the slate, but he's pretty expensive, and I'm not sure that I want to pay up that much for a catcher today when there's so many good bats across the league. Not to mention there's just good options at catching position. Now, Cal Raleigh, I liked him a lot yesterday, and he did hit a home run. I do like him again today, though he's not as good today as he was yesterday, but he's a good way to stay away from the St. Louis, Colorado game if you want to, and Seattle is a viable, stackable team on the slate. And then kind of a Hail Mary option is Logan O'Hoppe for the Angels, who's hit 3 home runs in 7 games this season. He does seem to score some fantasy points each game he starts, which he only started a few games last year. But he has some upside in this matchup. He's priced cheap, and so he's a good Hail Mary option at this position to help you pay up at other places. In the first base, we're going to look at Burleson first, obviously, because I have him as a core play. Now, he can play in the outfield, too, and so if you want to, utilize Goldschmidt, you can definitely do that by putting him in the outfield. But he does have some upside today. He's hit the ball really well to start the season, and I do think he has some utility here if he draws a start. He's also just cheap enough that it helps you pay up for some other options. Paul Goldschmidt obviously has big-time potential in a game here in St. Louis against a bad pitcher. He has good upside and should have some utility in this matchup. Shohei Ohtani is also fairly expensive today, but he's hit the ball well so far this season. He has home run potential in this one against Corbin, who's not a good pitcher, and he should have some good upside. Though I do like right-handed hitters against Corbin a little bit better, I do think Ohtani has some good upside, and he's a good contrarian option off of Goldschmidt if you want to keep those guys going. Brandon Drury can also play first or second base. Even though he hasn't hit the ball particularly well this season, he does have a good matchup and a good situation where he has good potential. Excuse me. Then we're going to look at second base, and Brendan Donovan is obviously from St. Louis, has some good upside. Now, his price is propping up some, and he hasn't hit the ball particularly great so far this season. He's a little bit riskier than I'd like due to his price being higher. If he was a few $100s cheaper, he would be a core play on the slate, but because he's not a must play by any stretch, and it seems like St. Louis, while they're stackable, he's actually kind of hard to stack considering the price ranges of the other guys on the team. Then I also like Ketel Marte for Arizona. Now, he's a little bit overpriced here as well, and he's been very inconsistent to start the season, but Arizona does have some upside here. He has hits in almost every game of the season, with the exception of 2 games early on, so he does have some good utility, and he did hit a home run in his last game. Then we'll look at Brandon Drury can also be at second base, like I have him as a core play, so he's definitely viable here. And then I have Sam Haggerty as a Hail Mary option for Seattle. He's only started 2 games this season, and if he gets more opportunities, he does have some utility. But he has managed to score fantasy points in all the games, with the exception of the 1 game, I think, that he started, which was this game here for against LA Angels. But he's cheap, and he is a Hail Mary play on the slate. He can also play outfield as well, and he's gotten a couple of steals this season, which is also nice. Then we're going to look at third base, and Nolan Arenado. Now, he obviously has big-time potential, and I do like him a little bit better than I like Goldschmidt today. He's hit the ball extremely well to start the season. He's got home run potential in this matchup. He is going to be somewhat hard to roster due to his price, but he's more useful on this slate than some of the other options because he's a little bit less expensive. You can also put Brendan Donovan here, but I really like Nolan Gorman as a good value play. At just $3,400, he has home run potential. His metrics are just as good as anybody on St. Louis in this slate, and so he's definitely somebody I like quite a bit as a good value play here. He seems kind of sneaky, too. Like, I don't think a lot of people are going to use him because they're going to try to squeeze in Arenado and others. So, then we'll look at Eugenio Suarez for Seattle. Now, I really do like him today because the metrics are off the charts here, and a plus matchup, and he hasn't hit a home run yet. He is fairly expensive compared to Gorman, though, if you want to go to an alternative way. but he does have some utility here. And this third base is just very loaded here on DraftKings with Anthony Rendon, who hasn't hit a home run yet either. He has really good upside in this matchup, and so I do think he's viable in this situation. At shortstop, we are going to look at Bobby Witt Jr. first. Now, he's fairly expensive on the slate, and he is hard to roster, and he's kind of boom or bust. But he does have some utility here, and this position is kind of hard to find a lot of good value. But we do like Tommy Edman today, though he's probably my fifth favorite player on St. Louis today, which, if you're stacking, you want, 3 or 4 of them, so probably, maybe not him. But he has some upside in this position that doesn't have a ton of value. Then we're going to look at Gio Urshela for the Angels. Now, he has some really nice upside in this matchup, and he's hit the ball well so far this season. No home runs yet, but he will get one eventually. But he is a solid hitter, and he can also play shortstop or third base. Then we can also look at Nick Ahmed as a kind of a Hail Mary value play. He's actually hit the ball fairly well to start the season. He does have some home run potential as well as stolen base potential, and he's near minimum priced, which gives you some really high risk, high reward upside at this position that doesn't have much value and helps you pay up for some other options on the slate. And then we're going to get into the outfield here, and we're going to start with Mike Trout. Obviously, he's going up against Patrick Corbin, which just screams like home run potential. He's also super expensive, which is tough, but he does have really good upside in this matchup. And so I do like him a lot here, and if you can find a way to roster him, he's definitely worth taking a look at. Now, Ronald Acuna is a good alternative to him at $6,300, about the same price. He has just as much upside, and he also has stolen base potential in this game as well, though it's a little bit riskier than Trout simply because the matchup isn't quite as good. And then obviously Ohtani can play this position. Chris Bryant also has really good metrics today for for Colorado at St. Louis. He has all the things in his favor. He hasn't hit a home run yet this season, but he's hit the ball fairly well. So as long as he can hit the ball well in this game, he's going to have home run potential in this one. Then we're going to look at Toscar Hernandez, who I really like today. He is fairly expensive, but he has home run potential, and occasionally he'll have big games, and he's had a couple big games already this season. Even though he hadn't hit the ball particularly well, he's one of my favorite plays on the slate, but his price range and his I'd say I call for a home run off of him today because his metrics are just off the chart, screaming at me. But his price does make him hard to roster on the slate. And then Tyler O'Neill for St. Louis. He's pretty cheap, and he's got a pretty good price range for his potential here. He's probably the third or fourth favorite Cardinal on the slate, and so I do think he's got some real viability here. Alec Burleson can also play outfield. I'm also going to give you some Hail Mary plays here, and Stone Garrett, who has some good upside against the Angels here in this matchup. And he started the season off extremely well, though he's only played 3 games. Even last season, he hit the ball pretty well and hard, and he has home run potential here. So he is somebody to consider as a Hail Mary option if he does draw the start. And then also Jurickson Profar for Colorado. He has some low-end upside in this matchup. He's somewhat high risk, high reward today, but he does have some utility. So let's go ahead and move over to FanDuel, where I really like the slate over here better because of the way players are priced. Now, as far as pitchers go, we only need 1 as opposed to 2, and we also have a utility spot here on FanDuel, which definitely helps us, price some guys in a little bit better. Now, so let's go ahead and look at this slate here. And let's start with our pitchers here. Max Scherzer is the most expensive option. Well, no, he's not actually over here. That's actually a couple other guys. But he's not the most expensive option, but he does have some good upside. He seems like a riskier play than I like, so he's not a must-play, but he's definitely viable on the slate. Luis Castillo, also very interesting for Seattle. He does have the easiest match against the Cubs, but he does have good K potential, and he does have some good upside here. He's definitely worth a look. Now, I do like Julio Urias. Now, he's the most expensive pitcher on this particular site, which does make him a little bit harder to roster, but there is actually enough value play that you can if you want to go with him. And he was over 40 fantasy points 5 times last season for San Francisco. He does get good strikeout rate against them, and he has 2 games over 40 fantasy points to start the season as well, so I do think he's a great option, though he is just fairly expensive. But if you want to save some money, the best way to do that, I believe, will be to go to Yu Darvish at $9,300. He seems like a good alternative to Urias today. He's got good stuff and good fantasy point upside. Even though he didn't have the greatest of games against Arizona, he should be able to bounce back here and have a pretty solid game against the Mets, who he actually did well against last season. Then we're going to get a catcher in first base, and we'll start with Goldschmidt. Now, he has some good upside here in this matchup. The St. Louis is definitely stackable. He is one of the more expensive options on the slate, so he's a little bit harder to roster than some. But depending on how you go with pitching, I almost think that it's probably worth paying down at catcher a little bit today so that you can pay up in the third base and outfield. But he is somebody you consider today just the same. Then we'll look at Cron for Colorado. Now, assuming he does play, he looks like he'll probably play today. So we'll have to wait and see, though. But if he does play, he'll have some good utility in this matchup. Then we'll look at Wilson Contreras as a catcher for St. Louis. Now, he has some kind of good upside in this matchup. He hasn't hit a home run yet, but this is about the best situation he's been in this season, so he's definitely worth taking a look at. And then Salvador Perez for Kansas City. I really do like him today, and he's pretty inexpensive here on FanDuel, and he's definitely viable. I wouldn't normally say, potentially put a catcher in first and then a catcher at utility, but both of them are priced pretty fair. Now, that's a higher risk scenario, but it is something you could do in GPPs. Then we'll look at Marcus Semien for second base at Texas. He has some really good upside in this matchup, and he's priced really fair. I think he's underpriced, actually, on the slate, as a lot of players are at this position. But he is viable. He has home run potential here, and so he is definitely somebody to consider. Brendan Donovan, also priced a lot better here on FanDuel, makes him pretty viable. But he's not as cheap as I thought he would be here. I thought he'd be around $3,400. So it does make him a little bit harder to roster, but he's definitely viable on the slate. Ketel Marte, also very cheap on FanDuel, though he's high risk, high reward. But I do think he's worth taking a look at because of his price. And he has some nice upside in this matchup. It's probably the best matchup he's had this season. Then we'll look at Brendan Drury, who can play second or third base. He hasn't hit the ball particularly great to start the season, but he does have good upside in this matchup, and I do think he's got a viable chance to potentially hit a home run here. And then also Nolan Gorman. Like I said, there's a lot of good options at second base today. He's hit the ball extremely well to start the season. He's priced at the same price as Donovan, which typically I wouldn't like as much, but quite frankly, he's just a good option on the slate. Then we're going to look at third base and look at Arenado. Now, I really like Arenado today. I like him better than Goldschmidt, and he's a little bit cheaper on FanDuel than Goldschmidt is. Definitely has him in a viable spot. And if you don't want to pay down, he's probably one of my favorite pay-up plays on this slate on this site. Then we'll look at Brandon Drury for LA. Now, you can use him at second or third base, and so that's definitely nice. But Eugenio Suarez is $3,000 here on FanDuel, and he seems like a really good spot to potentially hit a home run. I really do like him today, and he's definitely a viable option on the slate. And then finally, Anthony Rendon, who has some low-end upside in this matchup for the Angels. Hasn't hit a home run. He's only played 4 games so far this season, but he's got a nice potential upside game here to go with it. Then we'll look at Corey Seager for Texas. He really looks like a pretty good option today at this position. Now, this position has got 3 guys that are pretty much the same price, and so I do like all 3 of them to potentially be good plays. But I do like Seager, probably the top of those 3. Bobby Witt is the next one for Kansas City. He's in a riskier situation, but he does have some good upside here, and he's got home run potential. And so I do think he's got some viability. And then finally, Tommy Edman, who's in a good opportunity, but I think he's probably my 5th favorite Cardinal today. So he's going to be somewhat hard to roster if you try to stack the St. Louis Cardinals on the slate. Especially since you can only put 4 players from one team on FanDuel. Then we'll look at Mike Trout for the Angels in the outfield. He's one of the really good plays today, though he's super expensive. He is going to be hard to roster on the slate. Ohtani also has some nice upside today, but not as much as the right-handed hitters for the Angels, but he does have some utility here as a good play on the slate. And then Ronald Acuna also has some really good stuff. Not only that, but he's been getting some steals, which definitely gives him more upside. But he's almost as expensive as Trout, so he is a little bit harder to roster over here. But then we look at Toscar Hernandez, one of my favorite plays because of his price here, $2,800. He's got home run potential written all over him today. I really love him on the slate. He's priced way too cheap here on FanDuel, and he is a must play basically. Then Taylor Ward at $3,700. He's not a must play, but he's got a really good metrics, a lot of good opportunity here. And when he does pop up to the top of my stuff, I tend to really like him a lot. Chris Bryant is also a very good option today, and a little bit more affordable than Ward. He has all the metrics in his favor. He hadn't hit a home run yet this season either, but I really do think he's got some good upside in this matchup. Then we're going to look at Tyler O'Neill, who I also really like here at $3,100. He seems like he's got good metrics on this slate and has some nice upside in this and potential here. Alec Burleson is also viable here. Now he's a little bit more expensive than he is on FanDuel, but he definitely has some good utility here. And so than he does on DraftKings, but he has some good utility here as a potential home run hitter and a plus matchup game. And then finally, last but not least, Hunter Renfroe. He's just kind of a good Hail Mary / value play for the Angels in this game. If you want to stack the Angels, he would definitely be somebody to take a look at, assuming he draws a start, and he does help you pay up for some other options. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.